Listen closely as J.D. Vance shatters Hillary Clinton's 30 years of armor with the brutal mathematics of $120 million. Hillary Clinton told the Vice President of the United States that he didn't grow up to serve the public, he grew up to write about growing up. She had survived Kennedy. She had survived Who Made Sure. She had survived 30 years of investigations, subpoenas, special counsels, and congressional hearings without losing anything that mattered. She did not survive 40 minutes with J.D. Vance, not because Vance asked who protected her, since Kennedy had already asked that, because Vance did something no one in 30 years of Washington combat had ever done to Hillary Clinton. He put her life next to his, Chappaqua next to Middletown, $750,000 speaking fees next to a shoebox with $412, foundation galas next to government cheese, and in the silence between those two lives, in the arithmetic of the distance between them, 40 million Americans heard the answer to a question that didn't need to be spoken. Smash that like button, because you are about to witness what happens when a woman worth $120 million tells a man who grew up in a trailer that he doesn't understand public service, and the man opens a folder and does the math. And I want this committee to understand the credentials of the person who has been invited to question me today, because I believe the American people deserve context. Hillary Rodham Clinton was 8 minutes into an opening statement that bore the architecture of 30 years of practice, each sentence load-bearing, each clause designed to distribute weight evenly across the structure of her defense. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room, Dirksen Building Room 226, the same room where Kennedy had asked who made sure 3 weeks earlier, was full. C-SPAN carried it live, every network split-screened. The gallery had been at capacity since 6 a.m. Because the last time Clinton sat in this room, she had not answered the question, and the country had come back to see if she would answer this one. She would not, but she did not know that yet. At minute 9, she turned from the committee and looked directly at J.D. Vance. Mr. Vice President, I've been in public service for 30 years. I've traveled to 112 countries as Secretary of State. I've negotiated with heads of government on every continent. I've sat in the Situation Room during operations that this committee does not have the clearance to discuss, and I am here today to be lectured about ethics by a man who was a venture capitalist for Peter Thiel before he discovered politics. Her voice found the register she reserved for men she considered beneath her, not the sharp register of combat, but the flat register of dismissal, which is worse. You didn't grow up to serve the public, Mr. Vance. You grew up to write about growing up, and then a billionaire made you a senator. So before you open that folder, and I can see it S very thin, I ask you to consider whether a man who owes his career to a Silicon Valley billionaire is really the right person to question a woman who has spent 3 decades in service to this country. The gallery section behind the Democratic staffers produced a sound, the sharp, practiced exhalation of people who had been waiting since the Kennedy hearing for Clinton to hit back, and were receiving it now with the satisfaction of a debt being paid. The woman who had spent 3 decades in service to this country had, during those 3 decades, accumulated an estimated net worth of $120 million, had not driven her own car since 1996, and had not carried her own luggage since 1993. She owned 2 homes in Chappaqua, New York, with a combined value of $2.85 million. Her husband had earned over $100 million in speaking fees since leaving the White House. Their foundation had received over $2 billion in donations from individuals, corporations, and foreign governments, many of whom had business before her State Department. This was not the same Clinton who had sat before Kennedy 3 weeks earlier. This Clinton had studied the footage. She had watched herself reach for the water glass and miss. She had watched the orbicularis oculi contract. She had watched her neck flush above the collar line, and she had corrected. The hands were pre-positioned on the table, flat, spread, locked into place before the hearing began. The jaw was preset. The water glass was positioned 6 inches farther from her right hand than it had been in the Kennedy hearing, far enough that reaching for it would require a deliberate visible motion rather than a casual one, and therefore she would not reach for it at all. The armor was visible precisely because it was new, the body language of a woman who had reviewed the film of her first loss, and had come to the rematch prepared for every specific attack that had worked before. J.D. Vance sat at the far end of the dais, dark suit, no tie, top button undone. His folder, thin, 5 tabs color-coded, sat on the desk. He had not spoken during Clinton S. opening statement. He had not taken notes. His hands rested on either side of the folder, palms down. His face carried the expression of a man who is listening not to what is being said, but to what is being revealed by the saying of it. He opened the folder, pulled out a single sheet. Ma M., thank you. You described 30 years of public service. Let me describe what 30 years look like from where I am from. In 2014, you gave an interview to Diane Sawyer on ABC News. She asked you about your finances after leaving the White House. You said, and I'm quoting directly, "We came out of the White House not only dead broke, but in debt." He placed the printed quote on the desk. Dead broke. He looked at her. Then he looked at the committee. Then he looked at the gallery. He was not performing. He was remembering. And the remembering was visible in his face, not as emotion, but as distance. The distance of a man who is traveling backward in time to a place the room has never been. Ma Am, I want to tell you what dead broke looks like. Not White House dead broke, Middletown dead broke. Dead broke in Middletown, Ohio, means you sit at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. and put 2 envelopes in front of you. One is the electric bill, one is the grocery list. You can pay one, you pick the electric bill because it's February, and the pipes will freeze. Then you go to the cabinet and count what's there. Canned corn, canned beans, government cheese, the kind that comes in a block the size of a brick. You eat government cheese for dinner because dinner is the meal that depends on whether the adults in the house are functional, and tonight they are not. My grandmother kept her savings in a shoebox, Nike size 11, my stepfather's old shoes. When she died, I can lose ludus, losing $12. That was her life savings, Ma Am, everything she accumulated in 70 years of living, $412. He looked at the quote on the desk, dead broke. 3 years after you said you were dead broke, you and your husband owned 2 homes in Chappaqua, New York, with a combined value of $2.85 million. Your husband was earning $150,000 per speech. You had a book deal worth $14 million. Ma Am, dead broke doesn't have a speaking agent. Dead broke doesn't have a book deal. Dead broke doesn't buy a second house for the Secret Service to live in next door. Dead broke is a shoebox with $2 and a cabinet with government cheese, and a woman who worked her entire life and left this world with less money than your husband earns in 9 minutes at a podium. He pulled a second sheet. A committee prepared analysis showing 2 lines on a chart. The committee staff prepared a comparison. Your estimated net worth trajectory from 2001, when you left the White House, to 2024, from approximately 0, or as you described it, dead broke, to an estimated $120 million. Over the same period, the median household income in Middletown, Ohio, moved from $38,000 to $41,000. In 23 years, you gained $120 million. In 23 years, Middletown gained $3,000. He set the chart beside the, quote, 2 documents on the desk. That's not a comparison, Ma Am. That's a diagnosis. Clinton S. hands, the prepositioned hands, the pre-armored hands, the hands she had locked into place before the hearing began because she had watched the Kennedy footage and seen what unchoreographed hands reveal, moved. The right hand slid over the left, fingers interlocked, not a clasp, not a prayer, a covering. The gesture of a body that is seeking a configuration in which both hands are hidden behind each other because any other configuration, flat, spread, reaching, gripping, has been identified as a vulnerability and corrected out of the repertoire. The interlocking was tight, the knuckles whitened by a shade, not enough for the gallery to see, enough for the C-SPAN close-up camera to register, and enough for the 20 million people watching at home to understand that the woman who had armored herself against every weakness Kennedy had found was now discovering that Vance was not attacking the same weaknesses. Vance turned to Tab. Ma Am, let's talk about speaking fees. He read from the sheet with the precision of a man who has memorized the numbers but reads them anyway because reading is more deliberate than reciting, and deliberation is the point. Before you became Secretary of State, your husband's standard speaking fee was approximately $150,000. During your tenure as secretary from 2009 to 2013, his fees rose $500,000 per speech in Russia, $750,000 in China. Organizations that paid your husband to speak also donated to the Clinton Foundation. In total, he earned at least $26 million from entities that had business before your State Department. He paused, calculated. $750,000 for one speech, 1 hour. In Middletown, the median household income is $40,000. One speech by your husband equals 18 years and 9 months of wages for a family in my hometown. The number hung in the hearing room the way numbers hang when they are specific enough to be felt, not as data, but as weight, 18 years and 9 months. The room could feel it, the gallery could feel it, the C-SPAN audience could feel it. Because the number was not abstract, it was convertible. Every person watching could divide their own salary into $750,000 and arrive at their own version of the number, and every version was devastating. Now let's talk about who was paying. He read rapidly, no commentary between names, each name a separate line. UBS. After you intervened on their behalf with the IRS, donations to the Clinton Foundation increased from $60,000 to $600,000. Your husband received $1.5 million in speaking fees from UBS. Saudi Arabia, Germany, Australia, the United Arab Emirates, corporations pursuing U.S. government contracts. The Associated Press analyzed your State Department calendar and found that 85 of the 154 private individuals you met with during your tenure had donated a combined $156 million to the Clinton Foundation. He set the list down, then picked up a second document, the Grassley Records, from December 2025. Senator Grassley's investigation revealed that when FBI agents attempted to investigate these financial relationships, the foundation, donations, the speaking fees, the State Department overlap. They were blocked. DOJ leadership under the Obama-Biden administration repeatedly interfered. Agents were told to stand down. Prosecutors were denied support from the Public Integrity Section. An EDAR prosecutor wrote, and I am quoting from the record, "There appear to be conflicts of interest for the leadership at Main Justice related to the 2016 Clinton investigations." Shend FBI Deputy Director McCabe blocked the Foundation investigative team from accessing evidence on the laptop of Anthony Weiner, the husband of your aide, Huma Abedin. The evidence was redirected. The agents were sidelined. I want to make sure the committee understands what happened. Your husband's speaking fees quintupled while you were Secretary of State. 85 of your private meeting partners donated $156 million. UBS donations increased tenfold after your intervention, and when the FBI tried to investigate, the people whose job it is to investigate exactly this kind of pattern, they were told to stop. Senator Kennedy called it architecture. I am going to call it something simpler. In Middletown, when someone pays you after you help them with the government, we don't call it a speaking fee, we don't call it philanthropy, we don't call it a foundation donation, we call it a price. And when the police try to investigate the price, and someone tells the police to stop, we call that something else entirely. He did not say the word, he did not need to. The room supplied it. Clinton's neck changed color, not brightly, not the vivid flush that comes with anger or shame, the slow, involuntary warming that happens when blood flow increases to the surface of skin that is not protected by powder or foundation. The makeup on her face, the professional application that had survived Kennedy's 40 minutes without a visible crack, did not extend below the jawline. The neck was unprotected, and the neck, unlike the face, cannot be instructed to maintain a color. It responds to blood pressure, to heart rate, to the autonomic nervous system's assessment of threat, an assessment that operates below the level of consciousness and cannot be overridden by 30 years of hearing room practice. The flush was subtle, a one-shade warming along the left side of her neck from the collar of her jacket to the point where the jaw meets the ear. C-SPAN camera 2, positioned at the witness table level, angled upward, captured it in the particular clarity of high-definition congressional coverage. The flush would be visible on any screen larger than a phone. On the phones of the 20 million people watching, it would appear as a slight change in the warmth of the image, the kind of change that viewers process unconsciously as something is happening that she does not want you to see. Vance did not acknowledge the flush. He did not look at her neck. He turned a tab. "Ma-am, I want to talk about 33,000 emails, but I'm not going to talk about them the way they've been talked about before. I'm not going to talk about classified information or BleachBit or the oh shoot moment. Senator Kennedy covered that ground, and he covered it well. I'm going to talk about a man named Ray. He didn't pull a document. He spoke from memory, the memory of a place, not a file. Ray lived in Middletown. He drove a forklift at a warehouse on Brile Boulevard, the warehouse that used to be an Armco supplier before Armco left. On the side, he ran a lawn-mowing service, 3 employees, 2 riding mowers. He did the books himself on a yellow legal pad, the way people do books when they can afford an accountant. When the IRS audited Ray S. lawn-mowing business, not for fraud, ma-am, for a filing error, Ray panicked. He shredded his financial records, not classified documents, not top-secret email chains, financial records for a lawn-mowing business with 3 employees and 2 riding mowers. Ray was charged with obstruction of a federal investigation. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison. His wife visited him every Saturday. His lawn-mowing business closed when he got out. The warehouse had cut his hours. He drives for DoorDash now. He paused, let Ray S. story sit in the room the way Ray S. story sits in Middletown, quietly, permanently. The story of a man who destroyed the wrong papers and paid for it with 14 months and a lawn-mowing business. Now, let me tell you about your papers, ma-am. On the 4th of March 2015, the House Select Committee on Benghazi issued a subpoena for your emails between March 25th and March 31st. 3 weeks later, a technician at Platte River Networks used a program called BleachBit to permanently destroy approximately 33,000 emails from your private server. Those emails included chains containing top-secret information, the highest classification level the United States government assigns. 8 chains were top secret, 36 were secret. The technician later told the FBI he had an oh shoot moment when he realized he hadn't deleted them when he was first instructed to, months before the subpoena, so he deleted them after. FBI Director Comey called your handling extremely careless. He recommended no charges. He gave a press conference instead. He looked at her, then at the committee, then back at her. Ray destroyed financial records for a lawn-mowing business and got 14 months. You destroyed 33,000 emails, some containing top-secret information, 3 weeks after a congressional subpoena, and you got a press conference. Ray S. records were about mowing lawns. Your emails were about national security. Ray couldn't afford a lawyer. You could afford David Kendall. Ray went to prison. You went on a book tour. He let the parallels sit, each one a pair, each pair a mirror, each mirror reflecting the same law applied to 2 different people and producing 2 different outcomes. And while we re-talking about things that cost other people more than they cost you, in 2022, your presidential campaign and the DNC paid a $113,000 fine to settle an FEC investigation. The investigation found that your campaign misreported spending on opposition research that became the Steele dossier. That dossier was used by the FBI to obtain FISA surveillance warrants on Carter Page, an American citizen. $113,000, that was the fine for funding research that led to federal surveillance of an American citizen, based on allegations that Special Counsel Durham determined your campaign knew were unsubstantiated. Ma-am, $113,000 is 3 years of Ray S. salary at the warehouse. Ray got 14 months for shredding lawn-mowing records. You got a $113,000 fine for funding a dossier that was used to surveil an American citizen, and you paid the fine the way you pay a parking ticket, and you moved on. Ma-am, The difference between you and Ray is not the evidence. The evidence against you is more extensive, more documented, and more public than anything in Rey's case file. The difference is not the law applies to both of you. The difference is the zip code. The room received the line the way rooms receive lines that are simple enough to be true and true enough to be simple, with the silence of recognition, which is different from the silence of shock. Shock is loud. Inside recognition is quiet. Recognition is the sound of 40 million people arriving at a conclusion they already held but had never heard spoken in a Senate hearing room by a vice president who grew up in the same zip code as Ray. Clinton's breathing changed. The controlled breathing, the measured performance-grade respiratory rhythm she had maintained since the hearing began, the breathing she had practiced after the Kennedy hearing, the breathing that was supposed to prevent the kind of diaphragmatic irregularity that cameras can detect, shifted. The intervals between inhale and exhale shortened by approximately half a second, not visible, not audible, but present in the way that changes in breathing are always present, in the slight elevation of the shoulders at the top of each inhale, the micro-pause at the bottom of each exhale that was not there 5 minutes ago. The body was quietly increasing its oxygen supply. The brain had made a determination below the level of consciousness that the next phase of the hearing would require more resources than the current respiratory rate could provide. The armor was holding, the breathing beneath it was not. Vance turned the final tab. The room felt the shift, not because Vance moved differently. He didn't. Because the folder was almost empty, one tab left, the last page, and the audience, the committee, the gallery, the cameras, all of them had watched 4 stories now and understood the rhythm. The last tab is where the question lives. Vance's voice changed. Not louder, not softer, closer. The voice of a man who is no longer reading from a folder, but speaking from a kitchen table. "Ma'am, I want to tell you about a woman named Mrs. Henderson. I'm not going to use her first name because she never liked people using her first name. She said it was too familiar for strangers, and she considered most people." Mrs. Henderson worked in the cafeteria at the Armco Steel Mill in Middletown, Ohio, for 31 years. She served lunch, meatloaf on Wednesdays, chicken on Fridays. She knew every steel worker by name. She called them honey, every single one of them, and none of them ever corrected her, because when Mrs. Henderson called you honey, it meant she had decided you were worth feeding, and that was a compliment, Mrs. Henderson retired at 74. She retired on Social Security, $847 a month. She had no foundation, no speaking fees, no book deal, no homes in Chappaqua. She had a 1-bedroom apartment on Corwin Avenue with a kitchen table where she ate dinner alone because her husband had died in 2009 and her children had moved to Columbus because there were no jobs in Middletown. Mrs. Henderson served the public for 31 years. Ma-am. She served lunch to the men who built the steel that built this country, and she retired with $847 a month and a kitchen table. He looked at Clinton. You served the public for 30 years. You traveled to 112 countries. You negotiated with heads of state. You sat in the Situation Room, and you retired with $120 million. He paused. The pause was mathematical. He was giving the room time to do the arithmetic. Not the arithmetic of the numbers, which was obvious, but the arithmetic of the comparison, which was devastating. Your foundation received over $2 billion in donations from individuals, corporations, and foreign governments, many of whom had business before your State Department. Your husband earned over $100 million in speaking fees, fees that quintupled during your time as Secretary of State, paid by organizations seeking favorable treatment from your department. You own homes in Chappaqua, in Washington. Your daughter lives in a $10.5 million apartment in Manhattan. 3 weeks ago, Senator Kennedy asked you, who made sure you were never held accountable? You didn't answer. A month before that, you sat for 6 hours of Epstein deposition and answered, I don't recall, to 34% of the questions asked. And today, I am not going to ask who protected you. I'm not going to ask what you recall. I'm going to ask something simpler. He looked at her, then at the gallery, then back at her, the look of a man who is about to say the thing he came to say, and who has spent 40 minutes earning the silence that the thing requires. Mrs. Henderson retired with $847 a month. She served meatloaf to steel workers for 31 years. She never traveled to 112 countries. She never sat in the Situation Room. She never had a foundation. She served the public, the actual, physical, show up everyday public, and she retired with nothing. I grew up eating the meals that women like Mrs. Henderson served: government lunch, free breakfast, canned peaches and syrup. Those meals kept me alive during the years my mother couldn't. The women who served those meals in Middletown, in cafeterias, in school kitchens, they were public servants. They didn't call it that, they called it work, and they retired with Social Security and nothing else. Ma'am, my question is simple. It is not about emails, it is not about Epstein, it is not about the foundation, it is about arithmetic. In 30 years of public service, you accumulated $120 million. In 30 years in Middletown, my neighbors accumulated nothing. Their factories closed, their children got addicted, their houses lost value. Their public servants, the ones who were supposed to represent them, got rich while they got forgotten. Who were you serving? 6 seconds, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 seconds of silence. Clinton S. armor, the armor she had built after Kennedy, the armor she had pre-positioned and pre-locked and pre-calibrated for every attack that had worked 3 weeks ago, encountered a question it was not designed for. Kennedy had asked who made sure, a question about the system, about the architecture of protection, about the machinery of immunity. The armor was built for that question. It could withstand that question. It could absorb it and redirect it into a 3-minute response about partisan investigations and 30 years of debunked allegations. Vance's question was not about the system, it was about the space between two lives. The space between $120 million and $412. The space between Chappaqua and Corwin Avenue. The space between a woman who traveled to 112 countries and a woman who served meatloaf on Wednesdays for 31 years and retired with $847 a month. The armor was not built for arithmetic. Arithmetic has no angle of attack, it has no ideology, it has no partisanship, it is simply two numbers placed side by side and the distance between them. Clinton S. eyes closed. Not the quick blink of a woman managing composure, not the wince of a woman absorbing a blow, a slow, deliberate closure. 2 seconds, approximately 4 times the duration of a normal blink, the extended blink of a woman whose visual cortex had requested a moment of darkness, not to hide, to recalculate, to process without incoming data, the way a computer goes dark when it is rebooting, not because it has broken, but because it needs to restart a program that is no longer running correctly. When her eyes reopened, they were the same eyes, same color, same shape, same eyes that had looked at 40 cameras in 40 hearings over 30 years, but the expression behind them had changed, not cracked, not broken, receded, the way a tide recedes, still water, still present, but farther from where it was. The woman who had entered the room leaning into the fight, who had insulted Vance's credentials and challenged his authority and performed the posture of a person who has survived everything, that woman had retreated to a position further back, a position where the face was still composed, but the composition was being maintained from a greater distance, the way a general maintains composure while withdrawing from a position that can no longer be held. David Kendall S. Penn was capped, had been capped since the hearing began. His legal pad was blank. There was nothing to write. The question was not legal. It was mathematical, and mathematics is not something a lawyer defends. Vance waited 12 seconds. He did not fill the silence. He understood, in the way people from Middletown understand, that silence after a question about money is always an answer about money. The rich are silent about their wealth, the way the guilty are silent about their crimes, not because they have nothing to say, but because anything they say will sound like what it is. Because from where I grew up, from the kitchen table where I sat as a child wondering if the electricity was going to stay on, It looks like you were serving yourself. He closed the folder. Mrs. Henderson served meatloaf. You served yourself. The difference is $120 million, and the $120 million is the answer to the question. He looked at the chairman. No further questions. Clinton responded. Her response was 3 minutes and 12 seconds. It mentioned 30 years of public service. It mentioned the Foundation's humanitarian work in 40 countries, clean water initiatives, HIV medication programs, agricultural development. It mentioned that she had been subjected to more investigations than any public figure in American history and that none had resulted in charges. It mentioned 112 countries. It mentioned the Situation Room. It mentioned the partisan nature of the hearing and the timing of the investigation relative to the 2026 midterm elections. Her response was comprehensive, the way a wall is comprehensive. It covered everything and revealed nothing. The wall was well built. It had been built over 30 years. Every brick was a talking point that had been tested, refined, and deployed in previous hearings. The wall had survived Benghazi. It had survived the email investigation. It had survived Kennedy. It did not survive arithmetic because the response mentioned the Foundation's work in 40 countries, but did not mention the $2 billion in donations or the 85 donors who had meetings with her State Department. It mentioned 30 years of service, but did not mention the $120 million those 30 years had generated. It mentioned HIV medication programs, but did not mention the UBS speaking fees or the Saudi donations or the $750,000 for 1 hour in China. And the audience, the 40 million people who had watched Vance place two numbers side by side and let the distance speak, heard what was not mentioned more clearly than what was. Because absence after arithmetic is louder than presence, and the absence of $120 million from a 3-minute response about public service was the loudest thing in the room. Vance did not react. He was already closing his folder, the thin one, the color-coded one, the folder of a man who does not tell stories, but reads numbers. He stood, buttoned his jacket, nodded to the chairman. He did not look at Clinton on his way out. He had spent 40 minutes looking at her numbers. The numbers had done the work. He was just the man who held the paper. The clip that broke first was not dead broke, or the price, or two justice systems. It was the math. The full sequence from $120 million through Mrs. Henderson retired with $847 a month to Who Were You Serving?, followed by 12 seconds of silence and the extended blink. 29 seconds shared 34 million times in the first 18 hours. The clip required no commentary. The numbers were the commentary. The second clip was the zip code, Vance-S comparison of Ray-S 14 months in federal prison to Clinton-S press conference, ending with the difference is the zip code. This clip traveled differently than any clip in the series. It traveled through criminal justice reform communities on the left, defense attorneys, public defenders, innocence projects, bail reform advocates, and through MAGA communities on the right simultaneously. For the first time in the series, a clip was shared with equal enthusiasm by people who disagreed about everything except the conclusion. The two justice systems existed. The zip code mattered. Ray went to prison. Clinton went on tour. The left called it systemic inequality. The right called it the swamp. They were describing the same thing. AOC shared the zip code clip on X without comment. The irony was visible to everyone except apparently AOC, a progressive congresswoman sharing a conservative vice president's attack on a Democratic icon because the attack was about class, and class was the one language that crossed party lines. 48 hours later, AOC's staff quietly deleted the post, but screenshots had already traveled to every corner of the internet. And the screenshots were in their own way more powerful than the original because they showed that the argument had reached a place where political identity could not contain it. The political consequences were not reputational. Hillary Clinton's reputation had survived 30 years of damage. The consequences were structural. They removed things from her life that could not be replaced by reputation. The Department of Justice under Attorney General Kash Patel announced within 72 hours that the formal review of prior DOJ conduct opened after the Kennedy hearing had been upgraded to an active investigation into financial transactions associated with the Clinton Foundation during the period 2009 to 2013. The distinction was not semantic. A review examines process, an investigation examines conduct. Grand jury subpoenas were issued to 3 current and former Clinton Foundation financial officers. For the first time in 30 years, the legal apparatus of the United States government was not reviewing how Clinton had been investigated. It was investigating Clinton. The Clinton Foundation Board of Directors convened an emergency session within a week of the hearing. The outcome was a public statement announcing the temporary suspension of international program operations pending resolution of ongoing federal inquiries. The statement was carefully worded. The reality was not. 3 major institutional donors, a technology conglomerate, a European sovereign wealth fund, and a pharmaceutical group, had communicated privately that they would withdraw their commitments if the foundation continued operations during an active federal investigation. The Foundation's CFO retained independent legal counsel separate from the Clinton family's legal team. In the language of federal investigations, when the CFO hires a separate lawyer, the CFO is preparing to cooperate. UBS issued a statement, brief, corporate, carefully distanced, noting that UBS's engagement with the Clinton Foundation was conducted by previous leadership and does not reflect current corporate governance standards. The statement was unremarkable in isolation. In context, following Vance's reframing of the UBS relationship as a price, it was the first public acknowledgement by a major foundation donor that the relationship required distancing. 3 additional institutional donors issued similar statements within 10 days. The dominoes were not dramatic, they were corporate, they were quiet, and they were irreversible. Bill Clinton's speaking calendar collapsed. Booking agencies confirmed a 91% decline in speaking requests in the 30 days following the hearing. The cause was not new scandal, it was new language. Vance had reframed every future speaking engagement as a transaction. Are you paying for a speech or paying for access? The question could not be unasked. Every organization considering a Bill Clinton booking would now face it in board meetings, in press inquiries, in the particular silence of a room where someone has raised a question that everyone was thinking but no one was willing to say. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted on a bipartisan basis, with 6 Democrats joining the Republican majority to refer the Clinton Foundation to the Department of Justice for examination under the RICO statute. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act was designed for entities that engage in a pattern of illegal activity. The referral did not allege that the foundation was a criminal enterprise. It asked the DOJ to determine whether the pattern of donations, access, speaking fees, and favorable State Department actions documented across 2 hearings and 3 decades met the statutory threshold for a RICO investigation. The referral was the heaviest legal instrument Congress had deployed against the Clintons in 30 years. The State Department, under new leadership, formally revoked Hillary Clinton's residual security clearance. Former secretaries of state retained clearance as a professional courtesy used for briefings, advisory roles, and continuity of institutional knowledge. The revocation cited ongoing federal inquiries and the findings of the 2016 FBI investigation regarding mishandling of classified materials. Clinton's legal team challenged the revocation. The process would take 12 to 18 months. During that time, Hillary Clinton, who had been inside the American intelligence community for 30 years, would be outsited. For a woman whose identity was inseparable from the machinery of power, the revocation was not a legal consequence. It was an exile. Chelsea Clinton's publisher quietly postponed the release of her forthcoming book on women in leadership, scheduled for summer 2026. A book tour, with its press events, its Q&A sessions, its inevitable questions about the Foundation investigation, had become untenable. The postponement was described as a scheduling adjustment. The adjustment was indefinite. The Clinton political dynasty, which had been a feature of American life since 1992, was not destroyed. It was paused, and in politics, paused means we are waiting to see if anyone goes to prison before we decide what happens next. Vance gave no post-hearing interviews. When a reporter from Politico reached him via text, he replied with one line, "The arithmetic is public." He did not elaborate. The arithmetic did not require elaboration. In Middletown, Ohio, Crystal Atkins sat in the break room of the Brighter Days Recovery Center. The television was on. The hearing had ended 2 hours ago. The replays were running. Donna was there. Donna was always there on hearing nights now. Crystal had watched 5 of them. Omar, AOC, Vance Clinton, Kennedy AOC, Kennedy, and now this. 5 stories, she said. She held up her hand, one finger for each. Omar, corruption, money going where it shouldn't. Vance pulled the receipts, one finger. AOC, Vance, the pattern, take first, pay when caught. Vance traced the money, 2 fingers. Clinton Kennedy, the system, who protected her for 30 years. Kennedy asked the question the system was built to prevent, 3 fingers. AOC Kennedy, the performance. Kennedy held up a mirror, let her argue with herself, 4 fingers. And now this, 5 fingers. She looked at them, closed her hand. This one is the simplest. Vance didn't need Boudreaux stories, didn't need, quote, folders, didn't need architecture or weather vanes. He just put 2 lives next to each other. Her life, his life. $120 million, $412 in a shoebox. And he asked who she was serving. She paused, looked at the 5 fingers Dan just counted on, opened her hand again, looked at it the way you look at something that represents more than itself. You know what these 5 stories really are? They read not about Democrats, they read not about Republicans, they read about the distance. The distance between the people who run things and the people who live with the results. Omar's distance was between federal food money and the kids who didn't eat. AOC's distance was between $16 from a DoorDash driver and a $19,000 psychiatrist bill. Clinton's distance is the biggest, $120 million in a shoebox, but they all the same distance. It's the distance between people who talk about poverty and people who live in it. Donna sat down her sandwich, and the people who live in it are the ones watching at home. Crystal continued. They're the ones counting, because poor people are very good at math. We have to be. We count every dollar. We know what $16.81 means. We know what $412 in a shoebox means. We know what $847 a month means, and when someone tells us they earned $120 million in public service, we do the math, because the math is the only thing that doesn't lie. She paused. The replay was running. The Mrs. Henderson section. Meatloaf on Wednesdays. Mama would have loved Mrs. Henderson. They were the same woman, different state, same kitchen, same $847 a month, same dignity that doesn't show up in any net worth calculation. And when Vance talked about her, when he said she called them honey, I could hear Mama, same voice, same woman, different name. She paused again, longer this time. 5 stories. 5 different kinds of distance, but every story ends the same way. Silence. Omar didn't answer. AOC didn't answer. Clinton didn't answer twice. And the silence is always the same silence. It's the silence of a person who has been asked a question that their money, their staff, their lawyers, and their talking points cannot answer. Because the question isn't about what they did, the question is about who they forgot. The silence was the answer. The $120 million was the answer. They the same answer. Donna looked at the screen. The replay was running, the 12 seconds of silence, Clinton's extended blink, the 2-second darkness, the eyes reopening with something receded behind them. You think anything happens this time? Donna asked with the investigation. Crystal considered the question the way she considered all questions. Slowly, honestly, the way she considered questions from the people in the group room who asked her if they were going to make it. The grand jury's real, the RICO referral's real, the foundation is frozen, the speaking calendar is empty, the security clearance is gone. She ticked them off. That's more than 30 years of investigations have ever produced combined, so yes. I don't know, but I know this. Vance didn't ask a political question, he asked a math question, and math questions have answers. You can I don't recall a political question. You can I don't recall $120 million. The number exists, it S on paper, and now it S next to $412 in a shoebox and $847 a month from Social Security. And the distance between those numbers is the kind of distance that grand juries understand. She rinsed her cup, hot water, no soap, upside down on the rack. The ritual every night, the same motion. She walked back to the group room, 8 people trying to stay alive. In Madisonville, Louisiana, Gerald Thibodeau stood behind the counter of the bait shop. The television was on, the hearing replay was running. A customer, the Tuesday catfish regular, stood at the counter watching. Different one this time, the customer said. Not the senator, the vice president, he get her. Gerald considered the question, the same question the customer had asked after the Kennedy hearing. Gerald gave a different answer. Kennedy asked who protected her for 30 years. Vance asked who she served for 30 years. He bagged the shiners, counted by feel, same woman, 2 questions, both unanswered. He handed over the bag, the customer paid. Both the answer, Gerald said. The customer left, the bell rang. Gerald turned back to the television. Vance was closing the folder, standing, buttoning his jacket, the thin folder, the color-coded tabs, the folder of a man who doesn't tell stories. Boudreaux would have liked that one, Gerald said to the empty shop. Boudreaux always said the best argument is the one with numbers in it, because numbers don't care whose side you re on. He turned off the television, wiped the counter, rearranged the spinners. The shop smelled like bait and coffee and the bayou. The bayou was still there, patient, unhurried. Gerald locked up, drove home, the same road he'd driven for 27 years, past the same houses, past the same docks, past the same water. Somewhere in Chappaqua, a woman who had traveled to 112 countries and accumulated $120 million was sitting in a house that cost $1.7 million, being briefed by lawyers whose hourly rate exceeded Mrs. Henderson's monthly Social Security check, preparing for a grand jury subpoena that had been 30 years in the making. Somewhere in Middletown, a man who had found $412 in a shoebox was drinking coffee that cost $1.75 and remembering what the kitchen table felt like when the electricity was about to be shut off. The distance between those two somewheres was $120 million, and the $120 million was the answer. If you made it this far, you just watched the simplest and most devastating hearing in the series. No Boudreaux stories, no quote folders, no weather vanes, just 2 lives placed side by side, $120 million and $412, and one question, who were you serving? Smash that like button if J.D. Vance reminded you that the most powerful argument in politics isn't a speech, it's a number. Subscribe for more stories where arithmetic beats rhetoric and a shoebox beats a mansion. Share this with everyone who has ever worked 30 years and retired with nothing, while someone who called it public service retired with $120 million. Comment below, what was your moment? Dead broke. The $750,000 speech. Ray in the zip code. Mrs. Henderson S. Meatloaf, the extended blink, or the 12 seconds of silence. After who were you serving? Turn on notifications because the grand jury has been convened, the foundation is frozen, the RICO referral is real, the security clearance is revoked, the speaking calendar is empty, and somewhere in Middletown a shoebox with $412 is sitting in a closet, and the man who counted the money inside it is now the Vice President of the United States. And he just asked the most expensive woman in American politics the cheapest question in the English language, who were you serving? 12 seconds of silence. $120 million. That's not a scandal. That's an answer. God bless Mrs. Henderson and her meatloaf on Wednesdays. God bless Ray and his riding mowers and his 14 months. God bless the families who sit at kitchen tables at 11 p.m. deciding between the electric bill and the groceries. God bless the grandmothers who keep their savings in shoeboxes and leave this world with $412 and a legacy that no foundation can match. God bless every American who served the public for 30 years and retired with nothing and who watched today as a man from their town asked the question they've been asking their whole lives. She served herself, he serves them. The difference is $120 million. And the $120 million is the answer. God bless.